It's December 5th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the motion to impeach the South Korean president. A motion to impeach President Yoon Suk Yeol over his short-lived martial law declaration was reported to the National Assembly's plenary session on Thursday. The resignation offer by the defense minister, who reportedly proposed Tuesday's martial law order to the president, has been accepted. The South Korean economy showed moderate growth in the third quarter, expanding by 0.1% due to sluggish domestic demand and poor export growth. And unionized railway workers here in the country will go on an indefinite strike starting Thursday, with their wage negotiations failing to reach a breakthrough. Subway services in the capital area, as well as high-speed KTX and regular train services, will see disruptions. President Yoon Suk Yeol named a new defense minister after accepting the resignation of outgoing Minister Kim Yong-hyun, who claimed responsibility for the declaration of martial law on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Yoon's chief of staff announced that former ambassador to Saudi Arabia Choi Byung-hyuk was chosen to head the Ministry of National Defense. A former Army general, Choi also holds a master's degree in strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College. The top office says Choi is the right candidate based on his extensive experience and deep expertise in defense, and would ensure the military fulfills its duties effectively, maintaining a robust readiness posture grounded in the South Korea-U.S. alliance. Now, this came a day after the former defense minister offered to resign, saying the mobilized armed forces had been acting under his direction and that he was solely responsible for the events. All ministry appointments must be approved by the National Assembly. In the meantime, the impeachment motion process against the president is now in motion, with the opposition party's impeachment motion reported to the National Assembly. Our correspondent Shin-Ayong reports.
A motion to impeach President Yoon Suk Yeol over his short-lived martial law declaration, proposed by the 6 opposition parties, including the Democratic Party, was reported to the National Assembly during Thursday's plenary session, with the ruling People Power Party not in attendance. The impeachment motion against President Yoon accuses him of disrupting constitutional order by suspending the National Assembly's functions and violating political freedoms by banning party activities. This marks the third impeachment motion against a sitting president in South Korea's constitutional history. Under the National Assembly Act, the motion must be reported in the first plenary session after its proposal, and the vote must take place between 24 and 72 hours after that. A vote on the motion can take place as early as 12:49 a.m. on Friday. The opposition plans to hold the impeachment vote as soon as possible. According to the National Assembly Act, to pass, the motion needs the support of 2/3 of the National Assembly, or 200 votes. With the opposition holding 192 seats, at least 8 PPP members would need to support it for it to move to the Constitutional Court. If it passes, President Yoon will be suspended from his duties immediately. The PPP said it has officially decided to oppose the motion, adding that it will decide how to respond, including whether to skip the plenary session once the voting date is set. Meanwhile, candlelit protests continued on Thursday across the country, with participants calling for the president's resignation. Shin-Ayong, Arirang News.
Now, the president's office has remained silent following the chaos from the declaration and has only informed foreign media outlets of the matter. An Sung-jin has the details.
President Yoon Suk Yeol and the presidential office haven't yet released an official statement following the declaration and ending of the martial law decree. However, the South Korean presidential office has claimed through foreign media outlets that the president's declaration of martial law did not violate the Constitution. A spokesperson for President Yoon Suk Yeol's office told Reuters that the martial law decree was done in accordance with the Constitution and was necessary to protect democracy. This statement seems to come as foreign media pressed for an explanation regarding the president's abrupt attempt to declare martial law. The presidential office further explained that the decision comes as an inevitable response following the opposition party's attempt for impeachment of head figures, including the heads of the Board of Audit and Inspection and the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, and its unilateral handling of budget regulations as mentioned during President Yoon's speech as he declared martial law. The explanation to the foreign press also reportedly mentioned that the declaration of martial law came late at night on Tuesday to minimize any effect on the economy and lives of ordinary citizens, and that martial law troops were deployed to the National Assembly an hour after the speech. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And the extraordinary event is also sparking discussions over mass resignation of the cabinet and President Yoon's potential departure from his own party. Our Moon Hae-ryun has more.
President Yoon Suk Yeol discussed the aftermath of Tuesday night's upheaval with PPP representatives on Wednesday evening after he postponed a public appearance. The presidential office reported that Prime Minister Han Duck-soo arrived at the presidential office in Yongsan alongside other representatives of the ruling People Power Party, including party chairman Han Dong-un and floor leader Chu Kyung-woo. This comes following a closed-door meeting between Prime Minister Han, senior presidential aides, and representatives of the People Power Party at the Prime Minister's official residence to discuss the fallout from the martial law declaration. The People Power Party is embroiled in internal debates over the aftermath of the martial law declaration. On the table are several options, including the resignation of the entire cabinet and even President Yoon's departure from the party, though the latter remains a point of contention. Earlier on Wednesday, Prime Minister Han acknowledged his responsibility for the current situation as the head of the cabinet in a statement, as he discussed the possibility of mass resignations of cabinet members with other party members. Some PPP representatives have called for the president to step down, while others argue that it would weaken the government's stability at a crucial time. In a separate development, senior aides to President Yoon submitted mass resignations, including the Chief of Staff and Senior Political Secretary Chung Jin-seok, National Security Director Shin Won-sik, and Director of National Policy Song Tae-yoon. It is understood that the senior secretaries reached a consensus to resign during a meeting chaired by the Chief of Staff earlier on Wednesday. However, it remains uncertain whether President Yoon will accept all of the resignations, as an immediate resignation of all senior officials could cripple the operations of the presidential office. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And more reactions from the international community. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington will continue to look to South Korea to set an example as one of the world's most powerful stories about democratic resilience. Lee Seung-ja's report.
Speaking at a press meeting in Brussels on Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. will continue to look to South Korea to set an example as one of the world's most powerful stories about the emergence of democracy and democratic resilience. The comments followed a question to the top U.S. envoy asking if he thought the emergency martial law declaration by President Yoon Suk Yeol was a mistake in retrospect for South Korea as it hosted the Summit for Democracy back in March. Blinken also reiterated that the U.S. welcomed the withdrawal of the martial law order and respected the National Assembly's move to reject the decree. He also said it's Washington's belief that any political disputes need to be resolved peacefully in accordance with the law. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also remarked on the recent martial law order, saying that Washington will continue to speak out publicly to strengthen the importance of South Korea's democracy. Calling it robust and resilient, Sullivan also stressed that the U.S. wants to see the proper functioning of democracy in South Korea. While noting that he's watching the situation closely, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said he welcomed President Yoon's decision to withdraw the martial law order. Speaking to the press on Wednesday, the UN chief spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric relayed Guterres' remarks while underscoring the importance of freedom of speech. However, others still expressed concerns over the recent declaration by Yoon. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said Wednesday that the emergency martial law declaration was worrying. President Yoon reversed his martial law declaration just hours after announcing it, following a parliamentary vote which ended it in a few hours. Not only has it triggered the biggest political crisis in decades, but longtime allies have also raised concerns over the declaration. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So the opposition camp is planning to carry out a vote on the motion to impeach the president as soon as possible, with the ruling party opposing the move. Let's discuss the motion in detail with Professor Choi Kyung this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Professor Jo, I'd like to start with a comment from legal experts that President Yoon's reason for declaring martial law apparently didn't meet the requirements stipulated in the Constitution and also in the law. Is that so?
Yes, we believe that's the case because there's actually quite strict and narrow grounds on which you can declare martial law. I mean, you have to understand that a martial law is basically an emergency powers measure where you are essentially turning the country under a kind of a war footing so that you can marshal resources and deploy whatever is necessary to respond to the emergency that the nation is facing. So the two essentially situations where it is possible to declare emergency martial law is where the country is at war or we are under attack, essentially, or there is a similar kind of situation because of natural disaster or things of that nature. So it's basically a situation where the circumstances are so dire that the civil order has broken down and ordinary functioning of administrative and judicial processes are no longer possible. And so you have to essentially change the administration and governance from civil order to a military one. And so this is a very serious measure that can be taken, that can only be taken in very narrow circumstances. Mm-hmm. And there are very clear legal provisions stating when the president can exercise the power. And obviously, we are not at war. We are not under an invasion. We are not experiencing breakdown of public order. The grounds that he actually gave in his declaration of martial law essentially cites the problems with the opposition party, mainly the Democratic Party, and how they have moved numerous impeachment motions against public officials, and they are not cooperating in the lawmaking processes. But he seems to have forgotten that it is he who has refused to ratify multiple sets of legislation that have actually passed through the National Assembly. That represents the will of the people. And so I could not find anything in the declaration that he made late Tuesday night that would actually give rise to a constitutional ground for declaring martial law.
Well, that's why the opposition party is finding it reasonable to, vote to pass the motion. But the ruling party has decided against the impeachment motion. If the motion is not passed, let's say, will the impeachment move end there, or are there more legal options for lawmakers to explore and take?
Certainly, there is no limit as to how many times that they can actually move the motion to impeach. Mm-hmm. And so if it's not possible to get the necessary numbers together, and I think the Democratic Party and the smaller opposition parties still are not enough to constitute the quorum, the necessary numbers, and they need at least 8 votes from the Conservative Party. And so they can continue to try until they get that number. And when the motion to request revocation of declaration of martial law was passed in the National Assembly in the wee hours of Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, there was 18 lawmakers from the ruling party, the Conservative Party, who actually joined with the opposition to move that motion. And so if we just had 8 lawmakers acting according to their conscience and recognized this unconstitutional act by the president, who really seems to have lost touch with reality, I think we would be able to pass that motion to impeach. And, he seems to represent a danger to himself as well as the country and the people. And it's really, I think, imperative and critical that we actually stop him from continuing further in his governance.
Well, still, should the motion pass, would President Yoon be suspended from his role as president immediately, right? Let's talk about that clause.
Right. So if the motion to impeach the president is passed, then he would be suspended from his duties as the president immediately, and the prime minister would take over as the acting. We don't really call him acting president, but he basically, under the constitution, he is designated as the second in line to take over the duties and responsibilities of the presidential office. And that's what we saw when Park Geun-hye was impeached and the then Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn took over as the deputy or person acting in charge.
Right, I remember
when that happened. Yes.
Well, let's say President Yoon's impeachment goes to the Constitutional Court at the end, but aren't we missing 3 judges when we need all 9 judges to conduct, hearings and also decisions?
Yes, well, you're right. So the full bench of the Constitutional Court actually consists of 9 judges, but currently we only have 6 sitting judges, and this is because out of the 9, 3 are appointed by or nominated by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. 3 are nominated by the main opposition party, and 3 are appointed by the president. But ultimately, whoever makes the nomination, the appointment is actually made by the president. And the president has so far refused to appoint nominations by the Democratic Party. And so they've actually held off nominating anybody for a while. But I understand that yesterday, the Democratic Party actually made the remaining 2 nominations that is their selected choice. And the problem is that the current President Yoon, will not actually appoint those judges to the Constitutional Court. And as you say, the Constitution says that for impeachment decisions, among others, you need more than 6 judges or justices of the Constitutional Court agreeing. And so we don't necessarily have to have the full 9 judges. And it is actually possible. The Constitutional Court actually made a decision in October that they will be able to hear cases even with 6 judges sitting, because it would be unjust for people to have to wait for the full bench to be filled. However, the Constitution specifically states that you do need more than 6 judges for an impeachment decision. And so the process will be that they will essentially have to go through the process of nominating and getting possibly the PM, once he takes over as the acting president, to confirm the nomination. And if the Prime Minister acting on behalf of, in his capacity as the acting president, does not make the appointment, then the National Assembly might move to impeach the Prime Minister. But we really don't want to think about that yet. And so we are just hoping that the appointments will be made in due process, and the process will be able to go ahead.
We are facing some critical moments here in the country. Professor Jo, thanks so much for connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
In other news, the defense treaty signed by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin in June came into effect on Wednesday. According to the North state-run media, the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty went into effect on December 4th as the 2 exchanged the treaty ratification instruments. The media added that Pyongyang-Moscow bilateral relations based on the defense treaty would be a powerful security device, which it said would promote the well-being of the people from both regions. Following the signing of the treaty, North Korea sent thousands of troops to Russia to support its war against Ukraine. South Korea's economic growth in the third quarter of the year fell short of earlier forecasts on the back of weaker exports. Data released by the Bank of Korea on Thursday showed that the country's GDP grew by a modest 0.1% between July and September this year compared to the previous quarter, the same as its preliminary data released in October. While this marked a rebound from the 0.2% contraction in the second quarter, the growth rate fell short of the central bank's earlier forecast in June of 0.5%. This comes as exports fell by 0.2% on quarter for the first time since the fourth quarter of 2022, spurred by a decline in auto exports. The Korean Railway Workers Union has launched an indefinite strike starting from Thursday. As the final wage negotiations fell through Wednesday, the workers of the Korea Railroad Corporation launched a walkout, demanding wage increases and more staff members. It is their first strike in 15 months. The walkout is to affect operations of subway services in the capital area, high-speed KTX trains, and regular train services across the country. Korail announced that it is to operate a 24-hour transportation task force to minimize disruptions. Though most passenger trains are expected to run, cargo trains are expected to feel the brunt of the strike, with only 20% of trains running. Now, the union said it is ready to resume talks if the management is to change its conditions.
Good morning, I'm Che Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting in France, where following a vote of no confidence by opposition lawmakers in the National Assembly, Prime Minister Michel Barnier was ousted on Wednesday. This is the first time since 1962 that a French government has been toppled in this manner. The motion of no confidence backed by a combination of right-wing and left-wing lawmakers passed with 331 votes, surpassing the required 289. This comes less than 3 months since Barnier, the European Union's former Brexit negotiator, was appointed the position. The vote was prompted by opposition to Barnier's proposed 2025 budget, which aimed to implement 60 billion euros in tax increases and spending cuts to address France's deficit projected to reach 6% of GDP this year. President Emmanuel Macron now faces a challenge of appointing a new prime minister to manage the deeply divided parliament and address the massive budget deficit. In Syria, the United Nations say that renewed hostilities have displaced approximately 115,000 people in just 1 week. UN Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syria crisis, David Carden, emphasized the devastating impact on civilians during a visit to an internal displacement camp on Wednesday. The conflict has resulted in at least 70 deaths, including 27 children, and injuries to 338 people. Critical infrastructure has also suffered extensive damage, with 43 health facilities and 24 schools affected. Speaking from Al Dana, Syria, Carden highlighted the airstrikes and shelling in Idlib city as a major cause of the displacement. Rebel forces, including the extremist HTS group and the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, have launched significant offensives against Syrian government troops, retaking territory in Idlib province. While aid efforts are underway, the humanitarian crisis continues to worsen as the conflict intensifies. On Wednesday, U.S. stock markets reached record highs following comments from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surpassed 45,000 points, closing at 45,014.44, a 6.69% increase, and the S&P 500 rose 0.6% to 6,086.47, and the Nasdaq Composite climbed 1.3% to 19,735.12. At the New York Times Dealbook Summit on Wednesday local time, Powell noted that the U.S. economy is in remarkably good shape, suggesting the Fed can afford to be a little more cautious in its approach to interest rate cuts. This bolstered investor confidence, leading to significant gains in technology stocks. In particular, Salesforce shares jumped 11% after exceeding revenue expectations and raising its annual forecast, contributing to the tech sector's rally. In Paris, preparations are underway for the grand reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral on Saturday, December 7th. The event marks 5 years since a devastating fire destroyed the cathedral's spire and much of the roof structure. Security measures have been tightened with a perimeter around the cathedral and road closures near the Seine. The restrictions have forced small businesses around the area, such as booksellers and Christmas market vendors, to shut down temporarily. However, the reopening is being widely celebrated, and the ceremony will kick off with heads of state and celebrities attending to honor those who helped restore the monument.
Western parts of Korea are forecast to see a mix of rain and snow as early as this morning. Southern parts of the west of Gangwon-do province could see up to 3 centimeters of snow until tomorrow dawn. Now, Chungcheong-pukdo province could see light flurries as well. Meanwhile, the rest of the western regions could see light showers. Now, today's highs will go up as high as yesterday. Then there will be a big drop in temperatures after today's wet weather, waking up to a low of -4 degrees in the capital on Sunday morning. Meanwhile, dry air advisory has been issued in the east of Gangwon-do along with strong winds. Take precautions against wildfire, please. Checking on today's highs now, Seoul gets up to 7 degrees. Daejeon and Daegu should top out at 10 degrees Celsius. Partly sunny skies for most parts, but Chungcheong-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces will be under cloudy skies all day today. Sunny skies are in store for this weekend for most parts, but Jeju and Jeollado provinces could see a mix of rain for Friday and into Saturday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps it up for us this morning. Thanks so much for watching.